What's up, world? Baby girls at physical therapy. So I thought, I thought I would try this out again and just see if anybody happened to be around and might want to chop it up a little bit about maybe our show today. I don't know if anybody's around on IG who would have also seen the show from this morning, Earn Your Liberation. But there were a couple of undealt with threads that I thought I would bring up. That a couple things brought to my attention in the chat. So while I had a few minutes, like I said, I figured I would try out again this IG live thing. Haven't done too much of that. So I will try to catch any comments if anybody has anything that they would want to raise or had any questions from earlier today's show in particular. But I'll start off by saying there were a couple of things. So it was a little bit surreal for me to be interviewing Molefi Asante today, somewhat after my introductory comments about Greg Carr. And the surreal part that was kind of swirling around in my head as we were doing the show was that I was introduced to Greg Carr indirectly via lecture tape, cassette lecture tape. That's how long ago we're talking about. As he introduced a debate between John Henrik Clarke and Cornel West. So this would have been around like 92, and the tape was titled The Meeting. And I had already been a fan of sorts of John Henrik Clarke. I had already begun, I think at that point, preparing to do my No, this would have been before the thesis. This would have been way before the thesis. I think I was still delivering pizza at the time, but I had already become interested in the work of Clarke. So that's how I came upon that tape. And Carr was introducing, and I used to say to Carr for years that I judged my intellectual development based on not having answers to and not understanding the list of questions that he initially laid out for Clarke and Cornel West in that tape. And then eventually maybe not having answers, but being able to at least feel like I understood the questions. That's how I used to joke about tracking my intellectual development. And in that introduction, Carr makes it very clear that he had come out of Temple's PhD program under Molefi Asante, but that, as he says in that tape, I'm not from Asante's temple. And for those who are familiar with some of that background, there were these differences between Clarke and Asante, pretty aggressive differences. And Carr coming out of the Clarke camp put himself, and I don't remember, and I don't know that I ever knew or learned or remember the details, but set himself apart from Asante. So, and for years I was, I'm a Clarkian and an admirer of Carr. So, of course, Clarke is no longer here, and to now be critical of Carr, and still not on Asante's side or team per se, but feeling far less critical of him than of Carr in the moment, I was like, wow, that's surreal. But all that said, there was still a lot that was left unaddressed, with Asante being there. And one of them was brought to me by a number of people in the chat, live and private. that had something to do with Asante's relationship with the removal of Max Stanford, I'm just blanking on his name. He took a Muslim name. Somebody in the chat will remind me. Forgive me. My apologies. There's no real excuse for that, but my bad memory. But and of Tony Montero, and I remember particularly with Anthony Montero at the time, some years ago, I conducted interviews with him and supporters from Temple, and it was sort of pitched as the traditional Afrocentric versus materialist, Tony Montero being a Du Boisian socialist, Asante being an Afrocentric scholar. That, you know, so I don't remember the details, but so people were asking me, would I raise that today with Asante on the show? And I would love actually to have done that or to do that, but I don't know Asante that well. We don't have any interaction outside of these kinds of occasional passing by or this kind of an interview. But as I said to them, like I don't really like sort of a gotcha thing, and I would have preferred that he would have known in advance that was going to be brought up, so that we would have just been clear that he would have, and also we just didn't have time. But I would like to have heard him talk about that, because I think, kind of like For the People, shout out to Listervelt Middleton, rest in peace. That would have been a good discussion to have. So I'm not mad at people for wanting to, but I hope folks could understand why I wouldn't want to have done it in that moment. And I definitely would have wanted to get more into the whole thing around Marx. I really think that this is, and again, it's not to defend Marx or Eurocentrism, and I agree with Asante that it's not that that African people need Marx, but I just feel like what bothers me the most about how Marx is sometimes dealt with is it's not that Marx is solving things for African people or that he understood appropriately African people. It's that African people and others, inspired by working with, updating, particularizing Marx's ideas, have done some of the most remarkably revolutionary things in this world. So, and that's ultimately what I judge everything by. So that's the only reason why I ever would have wanted to read Marx. Because every time I looked up, somebody who had read Marx was doing something or saying something that I liked and was making it appropriate to a context for Black people, which is something that has always spoken to me. So that's what I just would have liked to, and I don't agree with Dr. Dove's description of Marx's work. Pan-communist, often dismissal of Marxism as a dismissal of scientific socialism as a whole. Yeah, I agree. And again, I don't see it being done. I like this, like the book we were talking about today on the show was sort of, for me, a stereotypical example of what can be the shortcomings in African-centered critique of materialist thought. There's no clear substantive engagement with the work. So I'll even ask folks here or anyone can contact me and send me, like, I would love to see, and I gotta go and I will read Dove's work. I would like to compile the best African-centered criticisms of Marxism or various forms of Marxism, particularly those that actually demonstrate having worked with his work, grappled with his work, and more specifically, if anyone knows of work that has grappled with in dismissing what Black and African radicals have done, inspired by working with, improving upon those ideas. I I should go back and read Cedric Robinson's work, and I'll be reading some of that in preparation for an upcoming interview with Josh Myers about his new book on Black study, where he deals with Robinson again, because I know he wrote another book about Robinson. But I also remember what I did appreciate Dr. CBS's critique of Robinson. And what I remember of that critique was that it was that she felt that he had not done enough to address what black people had done with Marxist ideas. And that's sort of what I'm. Yes, Do Not Resist is the police documentary I recommended recently. I highly recommend that documentary. In fact, I want to watch it again. There's no punditry, it's not like a Ken Burns, let's go and do the history. No. And the dude, I read something about at the time, because the white guy that made the film, I think he himself, like his family has a police background, and he approached everybody as maybe not telling them overtly he was a fan of the police, but just presenting himself as someone, hey, my family's it comes out of the police, I want to do a documentary about the police, can I follow you around and record you? And then that's all he shows us. I don't think you hear, all you just see the police doing what they do from their perspective, in their own words, in their training sessions. And I think it's the best. I don't think it's the best thing you could hope for. Yeah, pan-communist, I'm with you on that too. The culture solves the class statement. Again, and I've not obviously not read all of Asante's 100 books, but I've read, I don't know, a handful, and none of them do what I would want to see done. And I can't remember, I'm sure that, I'm not saying it hasn't been done, I'm just saying I haven't done enough to find it. But I've always been dissatisfied with critiques of Marx that seem not to address what they don't explain any. He wrote a lot too. So, if Asante wrote 100 books, Marx has at least written, I don't know how many, but 100 books worth of work. And again, I'm not saying that he has to be studied. He probably should be studied. But I don't think that, without studying Marx, we can't be free. But I'm just, again, saying I don't think... where is the critique of what so many African people have done with those ideas? That's really what. So I like the Nkrumah Tureism. I'm not aware of an African-centered critique of that, which to me would be sort of the best synthesis of African-centered thought with Marx. No? Maybe? No? Yeah, right? No? I don't know. Anyway, so those would have been threads I would have liked to pull on some more too. The other thing I would have liked to have brought up is with all the references to check and to jump. 2 points. One, shout out to the good Africans in Paris and the AAPRP that I met up with last November. But being at least made aware of some new and Senegalese and Congolese based critiques of Diop. I'd like to hear what Asante and others think about that. I don't know it. I haven't read it. I'd like to see it be brought into the mix. What does Jump need to be updated? And then with all the references to his cultural work, there's never a discussion of that federated states work. So where does Asante and others, if we're not going to at least update Jump or bring in work that has looked to grapple with Jump since he's been gone so long, why is that part always left out? Hey, what's up, Dr. Dennis? What's up, man? Long time no see. I think some of the critiques are still hangovers of the very thing that are challenging race. They can dress it up as culture, but racism shortens their perspective about Marx. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't think it's just that. I think that's a good point, but I think it's that it's not just the race. Well, I mean, I guess you could say it that way, but it's really that people have not, I don't think there's been a real intensive and sustained study of Marx. And as Dr. Haight has pointed out, and I agree, there's a difference between studying and reading. And I've read a lot of stuff that I haven't studied, and that makes me less effective with the work. And so on some level, I don't think a lot of people, I don't get the impression that many in the African-centered camp have actually read enough of Marx or studied enough of Marx to do more than just sort of parrot various forms of he didn't care about black people and he was racist. And then, like I was saying, so if you read Being Human Being and you see what Dove and Asante do, I would have loved to be able to build on the point. I did raise it on the show, but I would have loved to build on this. If you see how they treat Marx, and then compare that to how they treat Foucault, and in particular Marshall McLuhan, I think that's very interesting to me, why that would be the case. And I love Marshall McLuhan. I love his work, and I don't pretend to understand it, but I've read a good bunch of it. I've watched that great documentary, McLuhan's Wake, dozens of times. So I'm not an expert on McLuhan, but I've enjoyed enough of reading him and about him to know at least that he was as racist and uncaring and unaware of black people in African history as Marx. And no African radical that I'm aware of has ever, I can't remember ever hearing anyone talk about McLuhan. Never. Much less use his work to engage in revolution. So I was like, why would you be so much more kind to McLuhan than you would be to Marx? And you talk about if Marx was steeped in European thought, he at least was steeped in radical European thought. McLuhan was steeped in nothing but the most conservative, mainstream, whitest of white thinking. And I still think he was dope in terms of making you, think about media and the environment it produces. But so I was very like, I would have really liked to when you thinking about the book, do you think it for a mainstream? Shun Kuo, if I'm saying your name right, what do you mean by that? If you're talking about me and my limited work, no. I've always my fantasies have always been that a handful of revolution, particularly with I remember I mixed what I like. My fantasy was I want a handful of revolutionaries only to read it and have it in their pockets while they're doing something. That was that. And I remember my dissertation committee saying, why don't you, form your argument in such a way that you could publish it in the New York Times? And I remember telling them, I don't want my argument in the New York Times. I'm not talking to them. And everybody's face was like, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's what you meant. So please elaborate. So yeah, but yeah, I would have loved to have pulled on that thread though, a little bit. The McLuhan versus Marx piece, I would have liked to talk more about that. Definitely jump in the Federated States. And then I would have liked to be able to talk. I do think, and I actually think that it is important for the community, for public intellectuals, particularly for people who present themselves as radical public intellectuals. If there is a public dispute, and it was a public dispute over the treatment of one by another, I think that they should come. Maybe, I don't know. My initial reaction is I think they should be willing to come on someone's platform and to publicly say, look, I know this is a matter of employment, so I don't know if there's some law or legal binding, but I think it would be dope. Like if you really, if I'm like in the case where Asante was, I believe, the chair, and Montero and Max Stanford, Ahmed, Muhammad Ahmed, right? Yeah. If they're his faculty, if they're faculty in Asante's department, or if I'm chair in a department and they're in these two faculty, and we're all public intellectuals of various kinds, and two of them go very public accusing me of not supporting them, yeah, I don't know. My initial instinct, I would want to go on the record and say I didn't, and even if it required, and they would have to agree, of course, by making it public, but even if it required him saying, look, you didn't rise to the standard, you didn't do enough work, or your work wasn't good enough, or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I have to think about that too. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Do you think the book Being Human is for a mainstream white audience? I do. And maybe not just white, but a mainstream beyond black audience. And again, I'm no Asante expert, but I think I've read enough, watched enough lectures over the years. In fact, in grad school, even studied his work. And against white critics and defenders of Eurocentrism, I defended his work. I mean, not that anybody cared, but like in classes, in my graduate papers, one of my favorite papers was a paper on Afrocentric criticism, and it was a defense of Afrocentricity against Eurocentric and mainstream conservative critiques. So in other words, it's not that it's ever been my favorite approach, but I've always felt that approach deserves room to breathe as anything else, which is kind of the way I feel now, and the way I feel about Afro-pessimism and various branches of black materialist thought. No matter what my bias is, I think they all should exist and be part of the mix and be discussed and debated and not demeaned, and the people who use them for radical ends particularly be demeaned. But so anyway, I say all that to say, but I've read enough of Asante's work to feel like the vibe, if I can't pinpoint the language or the specifics, the vibe doesn't, when, and maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's the time I'm reading it. But when I first read Asante, and even when I was reading him as a John Henrik Clarkian critic, it was still clear to me he was talking to black people in a way to move black people. I may not have agreed with the method or the tactic or the quality or whatever my disagreements were, or just my being on Clark's team. I don't know. But but this book felt very different. And as he said today, when he's claiming Ibram Kendi, I think that's a clear declaration of where he is politically. And I think we need to be far to the left of that. So I think again, whatever we think of Kendi, I think that's pretty fair. And when you read the book, it's, again, his reference to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and again, I probably would have liked to make this point. I didn't think of it quite this way during the show, but if you're going to be critical of Marx, less critical of McLuhan, and supportive of Kendi and Coates, I think that's a mainstream targeting audience. Black people don't want to hear nothing about Marx. White folks in the main don't want to hear nothing about Marx. So if you can wipe him out and promote Kendi and Coates, who mass white audiences have far less problems with, obviously the same with Foucault and McLuhan, yeah, you're not targeting a black audience. You're certainly not targeting them in some sort of militant way either. And you know what I thought today? This might be. I did think about this during the show. And I want to say it publicly so that hopefully people can check me on this as I get older. But I thought of, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I did think of the scene in one of my favorite movies, the original 12 Angry Men. And when that old white man says, breaking down the testimony of another old white man, he makes the point, like, you want that, the point he makes is something to the effect that you want, as you get old, that last bout of relevance. And that was the phrase that kept reverberating in my head as I thought about what I thought about the book. And it's like, and when Asante said today he's in his 80s, that's when it was like, it felt like that last, I want that last, and the best way to do it is to make that mass appeal that connects you to some of the more famous, popular black pundits of a younger generation today. So that's why I was, I was going to ask, is it worth it to get the book? I do think it's worth it to get the book. I mean, even if you don't agree with it, first of all, it's not going to take you that long to read. And it's not that there's no value in terms of some of the things he covers. And if for nothing else, I think it's good to see I think Asante has earned the right to see where he ends up. So, I mean, I wouldn't discourage reading the book. I might, slightly discourage fully agreeing with the book, but that's beside the point. I think you should read the book. And especially if you're interested in like the history of African thought, of African-centered thought, Afrocentricity, if you're interested in, I don't know, black studies in general, I think it's important. Again, I think he's at least earned the right to for us to see where he's at. And then we can, as I'm kind of doing now, disagree. And I think Dr. Dove's contributions are important as well. I don't mean to diminish her by not, I recognize she was a co-author. I just know that we disagree on Marx. So I am going to go back and read her work. And if she's going to produce more of a critique on Marx, I would like to. And honestly, if anybody watching this or anyone who sees this later, or if anybody knows of anybody who might know, please put me on to Afrocentric or African-centered thought or Afrocentric or African-centered critiques of Marx that are real critiques of Marx. I mean, that really engage his work. And if you have something that specifically includes reference to, it somehow deals with, yes, I'm criticizing Marx, but acknowledging what revolutionaries have done, not because of him, but inspired by, or again in conversation with his work. That would be very helpful. But I think I don't like the anti-intellectualism in the dismissals of Marx that are just too, and I don't, yeah. So that's that. I don't know if there were any other comments or questions, but I think that was it. I think that was just some of the things I would have liked to. Again, and just to double back, I mean, it's sort of the same theme in terms of why I have this whatever with Dr. Carr. That it's anti-intellectual. So for instance, and I didn't cover this in the show, but what he did today, what he did in that clip that I did without words respond to, when he says that both Mirza Baradaran and I are making a similar point about the insufficiency of black banking, he in fact said our works dovetail. And then he comes back to say in that clip that we have to do something. And they're not saying don't do any black banking. It's just not a solution. And when he does this without ever offering a full, in any place, review of the book, he's doing a disservice to his growing audience that is itself anti-intellectual. Never mind what I think about the inaccuracy of the description of my work, and it is inaccurate. It's not fair to your audience to simply reduce people's work that you're at least suggesting you're familiar with and have read, and you're not dealing with the nuance and the difference and the content itself. So for instance, I borrow from and learned a lot from and work with a lot of Baradaran's work, but we disagree entirely on what needs to be done. And when in that very clip I'm talking about, Karen Hunter can positively with Carr make reference to hosting Baradaran in some extended conversation with One United Bank, and this again be discussed as a positive, it shows again we're not on the same page. So it's not to say that, again, it's not even about, I'm not in this instance, it's not even about who's right or wrong. It's just to note the difference. I'm not saying we should engage in black banking. I'm not saying that we should engage in black business. I'm not saying that black capitalism should be engaged in, particularly without very specific political consciousness around what the end results should be and what the goals in fact are. And I'm certainly not supportive of these existing black banking structures, One United Bank, Industrial Bank, et cetera, and so forth, who I'm critical of in a direct dialogue with the CEO of, in terms of the Industrial Bank, in the book. In other words, to say that our work dovetails, but never explaining the difference, and then rebranding my work as supportive of his conclusions about black banking, black capitalism, entrepreneurialism, again, it's anti-intellectual. It's not. And then to do that, to do that again for some odd reason, I don't understand. And I don't understand why we haven't had some fallout. Like, why? Just review the book. Or don't. But I would just appreciate a proper characterization. You could say, look, if you're going to mention me at all, you could say, look, he's wrong, but he says this and that. But just throwing me in there as if you're characterizing me correctly, as if I'm being legitimately included, is disingenuous. But again, more specifically to the point I'm really trying to make here is that it's anti-intellectual. It's a disservice to the audience. It's not fair to black people or others who are watching to get these kinds of insufficient, unfair, inaccurate descriptions of people's work. And again, people whose phone numbers you have, emails you have, people you've been engaged in some sort of work or dialogue for decades. Come on, man. But anyway. So, yeah, anyway. But that's it. I guess that's it. Me and Diallo didn't have any disagreements this week. No. We were both in this case on the same team in disagreement with Professor Asante. And I think it's interesting for different reasons. But I think ultimately the same way. I don't agree with this idea that because race is biological and ultimately we're all human beings who originated in Africa. I don't agree with Asante and Dove that somehow means that ignoring, well, not I don't think they're saying ignore, but I don't think that somehow that means that we should move away from an analysis, even a race first analysis. Especially if you're not replacing it with a class first analysis, with this idea that if we get rid of that somehow if we can, I know he wasn't saying it, but it kept sounding like he was saying convince white people of our humanity that we can then move beyond these imposed categories and fix things, and that class would not anymore be a problem. I don't agree with that at all. I don't agree that there was no class issues prior to European and Arab involvement in Africa. But I also don't believe that at this point, even if that was true, that they would be solved, So anyway, I just, that was interesting. I think he took on the work to fit the narrative with what the little he did read. It did sound, that's kind of what he was saying, Sugar Booger. Yeah, it was weird. It was weird. They insinuate that race and culture are the primary contradiction, which isn't true at all. And again, I would like to see that grappled with. I don't mind, I get it. If you want to make Jump's cradle theory argument, okay, but then make it, update it, and then specifically address it to the materialist version and explain how that's wrong. That's what I think we need. That's what I would have. And years ago when I was involved with hosting radio, shout out to WPFW and shout out to Radio CPR, because even before PFW, I was trying to do this with some comrades. We were trying to host those debates. And in fact, years ago, I had contacted Malefi Asante to ask him if we could have him come back and recreate the debate he had with Kwame Ture. Obviously, Ture was already gone, but we were going to have others stand in. And we did come close to it. We had a couple brothers come in and debate, including Kemet Shockley, who was the original convener of that Asante Ture debate back at the University of Cincinnati. Him and Brother Chishango and Bilashaka, I believe, debated Bob Brown and Rick Tingling Clemens. Was that how it went? And I think there was a feeling it was a little bit, imbalanced in that Bob Brown was older, had more experience, so it was a little bit, but we did try to do it. My point is, I wanted to see people make the argument within the context of which is the best way to Pan-Africanism, with the understanding that, of course, Pan-Africanism is the all-upon, agreed-upon goal. Because we weren't going to debate we weren't going to have reverse hashtag arguments about whether Pan-Africanism is good. That was the given. The issue was which is the best way. And I remember then, my work on this, my approach to this needs to be updated too. But I remember then feeling the way I feel now, that nobody has read enough of either side's work. Black materialists have not read enough African-centered work and its varieties, and definitely vice versa. But the one caveat, though, that I would put out there is that I think more revolutionary activity is demonstrably linked to black engagement with materialist ideas than the opposite. But I don't know. But again, I'd like to see, beyond just saying that, as we said today, as Dr. Dove, I think got entirely wrong about Marx's approach to the phrase primitive accumulation. I think she got that woefully wrong. So but that was just sort of a passing thing on her way to make a point in the book about Marx being racist. But then Asante is saying, I've written all this work and some of it has changed over the time. Some of it I might not agree with myself. So I deserve a little bit more consideration. And he's right. But then certainly Marx does. And not because he's white, but because I would argue more than anything, his positive impact on black revolutionary activity. But anyway, it was Cedric Robinson meets Ron Karenga. Wow. Yikes. Yikes. But I probably agree with CBS on that point, that Robinson didn't himself give enough credit in considering how black people engaged Marx's work. And I know the people who read Robinson, who agree with Robinson, have not done enough to read Marx, and I have considered that. That's my assumption. But I'm going to ask a true Robinson scholar when Josh Myers comes on the show in a week or so, or 2 weeks, or whenever he's coming. That's going to be one of the things I ask him about. And if anybody can answer it, he'll be able to answer it in terms of Robinson's, at least Robinson's work. I don't know how much Myers has dealt with Marx. But I'm sure he can help me answer that. Isn't that why African-centered thought is important to the political ideology of radical movement? If I understand your question, Shun Crow, yeah. I'm not saying only work with Marx. I'm just saying, again, why I like Nkrumah Toreism. I like even what Rodney was doing, if you want to call it, Rodneyism. He was clearly taking Marx's work, analyzing it through the lens and experience of, putting it to the lens of experience of African people, specifically for revolution. How can that not be respect? But not to the abandonment of African radical thought, indigenous African radical thought. And again, to the extent, one question, it kind of got brought up when Geechee was asking who determines what is African culture, but that would be the same thing in terms of who's determining an accurate reading of indigenous African thought. Like, how do we determine who's right about that? And how do we apply that? I don't know. Rodney was the greatest Marxist to do it. Shout out to Cabral too. Sure. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, and I've been in plenty of conversations. I've heard it. I've seen it. I don't think I've seen it in print necessarily, but I've heard, African-centered thinkers dismiss Rodney because he was working with that white man's stuff. And I'm like, that doesn't compute. So I know those sentiments exist. And my point is, that's done without reading Rodney, without reading Marx, without really considering or grappling deeply with their ideas or the application of those ideas. And I think that's unfair, I think August Nimps, the black academic you had on your show, destroyed Robinson's arguments for black cultural nationalism. All right, maybe. I mean, Frank Chapman has some, he got at him too. He got at Robinson too. And I would love to see more of like I would love, you know what? I got to make a note about that. Let's ask Josh Myers about that. And maybe he deals with any of that. I haven't read far enough in the book yet. So maybe he deals with some of that. But what are the Robinson, you know, like what would Robinson's team, so to speak, say to Chapman and to Nims? In terms of the work, not just saying, oh, you know, and then what would they say in response? Like, I would like to see that fully laid out. I would love to see that, whether it was written out in a big book or in a big debate series somewhere. That would be dope. Maybe BPM should try to. All right, I'm gonna use this live as a live note taking. Okay, we need to get a BPM conference together. And I want to do this live, in person. Oh man. All right, I'm just gonna have a little fantasy with it real quick. Live in person in a nice spot, but that's somewhat accessible, but somewhat also isolated too. And I would like it to be, I'm gonna say like a week. I know this is not realistic. You can't get that many people together for a week. But okay, like a long weekend. I'm gonna stick with the fantasy. Let's say a week. I want the week. And all week long, it's stay up late, enjoy yourself, sleep late. But from brunch to dinner, with maybe bathroom and water breaks, it's just straight panels, debates, presentations, all and only specifically dealing with, broadly speaking, African-centered versus materialist, or Rodney or Nimps and Chapman versus Robinson. And really, but like invite people who are going to clearly demonstrate grappling with all of these works and then putting forth an argument. Oh man, that would be dope. Oh man. And I'm saying like if we start to think about this now, so it's 2023. So we say, and I would want to say like, let's build this out. So let's say like 2025, maybe 2024, at least a year, but maybe like 2 years out, so that we give people time to maybe build this into their professional career path. People need tenure and to publish this stuff. Or at least start developing manuscripts so that by the time people gather, they can revisit the work that we're either not informed on or not up to date with. Get into it, get all of the ideas back up and fresh, and then really lay out the argument. African-centered thought, even versus Afrocentricity, has that debate gotten clear? Like all of that. What is the African-centered thought? What is African-centered thought? What is Marxism? What is it? What is African world engagement with Marxism? What is Nkrumah Touré-ism, and how does it engage all of these different things and answer the pitfalls and these other? Oh man. Like a Pan-African battle royal, intellectual battle royal, and just get everybody in there and like make a lasting document where it gets transcribed, edited, printed into volumes, So we would even remember those UNESCO volumes on African people? We could have like volumes on oh man. I think we should try to do something like this. Cause you got, and I don't know all these people, but people who have, like we could get the younger, like we can't, it's not going to be Asante. It's not going to be Mama Marimba. It's not going to be Frank Chapman. It may not even be Nimps. We need the Stephen Fergusons and the Cambones and the you all know what I'm saying. We need the slightly younger and younger generations, not too young, because we need people who've legit experienced this stuff. But you know what I'm saying. But people who are going to be able, I don't know, but maybe we get, I don't know. I'm loving all of these debates were happening in the 1920s. Let's bring it back since it still hasn't been resolved. The dark day. That's right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that would be tough. That would be tough. But I mean, BPM doesn't have a lot, but there's, slowly building. I wouldn't call it a pool, but maybe like a puddle of resources, like a small cup, a small teacup of resources. But maybe we could fundraise specifically for this. Maybe we could, I don't know. I'm just now thinking about it, but I think we should try to do that. Like, what better use of the platform and resources could there be? I mean, we have ideas about political prisoner documentaries and things like that, but I think this would be of great value. But I don't want just I don't want another online symposium, and I don't want another, I show up and present and then leave and either go home or go hang out with my buddies and we just go socialize. Like, I don't want that. It would have to be like everybody's committed to watch, like there would be no I don't even want concurrent panels. It should just be like days of plenaries. Everybody got to hear from everybody. And it can't just be, I'm going to go look at my favorite and his favorite and her favorite and their favorite and then dip. It would have to be all the African centers are listening to the materialists. All the materialists are listening to the African centers. All the African centers are listening to the Afrocentrists. All the Afrocentrists, everybody, you know what I'm saying? And I think, like, if we say, like, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., sleep late, get your rest, get your breakfast. 11 to 6 is plenary after plenary after plenary, dinner time, and then chill. Regroup, hang out, debate some more, and then back at it again. That's why it's got to be a week. Let's do it. Let's figure that out. I'm gonna put this on the next meeting table thing and see what the rest of the crew thinks. And then what do we think could be legitimately done? I would really love to see that. And maybe it needs to be built out beyond just 2 years. Maybe we need to like really build it out as like a big, and then do it like get back into that old. Well, we don't want just big numbers. Yeah, but I was going to say get back into that old style of organizing to get people to come on out. But I would love to see that. I would love to see that. Anyway. So I don't know, good people. I didn't have a plan for this. I just was sitting out here while baby girl is physical therapying her knee. And was thinking about the show this morning and all the stuff that I would have liked to get back into and to see happen going forward. So that's just sitting out here trying out this joint here. We have to look at it deeper from both sides. Yeah. I agree. I mean, again, like, the only reason I ever read Marx is because every time I looked up, somebody was doing something vicious and they had read Marx. So I mean, I'm not wedded to anything that's not going to lead us to victory. I would just like to see. I really would like to see. But I suspect. Anyway. I would like to see. That's why I was trying to get, and I know he's busy, but I'll try again. I was trying to do that workshop to get him to lead us in that workshop, Olufemi Taiwo, because he's written up these summaries, these brilliant summaries of Marxist thought that I think would be very helpful. Because I am suspicious that a lot of people are not reading Marx and have not. And then even if they are, it's not necessarily the most easily digestible work beyond like the Communist Manifesto. So I think a lot of people, and then to read it and not study it is the other thing. I think I've read a lot of Marx, but I haven't studied a lot of Marx. But again, when I read these dismissals of him, I don't think the authors are competent in those dismissals either. So I don't know. I'd like to see it. Like those cats that wrote Prophet of Discontent. I'd like to see them defend Marxist and the Marxist ideas as they've been brought into the work of Dr. King and black movements, and see what African-centered thought, what critics of that would have to say. Like, they would be qualified to defend it. The Dark Night Owl, and Dr. Haight deserves credit for that line. He's the one that made me focus on that. I can't claim that one, but that's it. Studying is not reading. Because we were talking about, there's sometimes there are people who are talking about, and I get it. It's an accomplishment. People are saying, I've read this many books, that many books. I don't know. Favoritism because people have scholars. Yeah. Anyway, so I think she's wrapping up anyway. Anyway, so I appreciate you all checking this out. I just, trying out, this IG thing, and got to build on a couple things that we hadn't resolved from today's show, which I think was wild and fascinating. And shout out to ML Smith for coming through and keeping us up to date with that struggle against the death penalty. And it's just terrible. But anyway, so, yep, she's literally walking out now. All right, good people. Thanks again. Peace if you're willing to fight for it. Catch you next time. Take care, everybody. But let's build this conference. All right, good people. Take care now.